Hello, Nick here. I'm back from a slightly different angle. Let's see how this goes. We continue our dramatic reading of Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. And we're picking up at Chapter 4, Detrital Wash. Here is a picture of where the story is kind of picking up in the area of the country where this part is taking place. We open once again with a quote from an influential writer in our protagonist's life, Paul Shepard. The desert is the environment of revelation, genetically and physiologically alien, sensorially austere, aesthetically abstract, historically inimicable. Its forms are bold and suggestive. The mind is beset by light and space, the kinesthetic novelty of aridity, high temperature, and wind. The desert sky is encircling, majestic, and terrible. In other habitats, the rim of the sky above the horizontal is broken or obscured. Here, together with the overhead portion, it is infinitely vaster than that of rolling countryside and forest lands. In an unobstructed sky, the clouds seem more massive, sometimes grandly reflecting the Earth's curvature on their concave undersides. The angularity of desert landforms imparts a monumental architecture to the clouds, as well as to the land. To the desert go prophets and hermits. Through deserts go pilgrims and exiles. Here, the leaders of the great religions have sought the therapeutic and spiritual values of retreat, not to escape, but to find reality. Once again, that was from Paul Shepard, Man in the Landscape, a historic view of the aesthetics of nature. The bear paw poppy, Arcotomecon californica, is a wild flower found in an isolated corner of the Mojave Desert and nowhere else in the world. In late spring, it briefly produces a delicate golden bloom, but for the most part of the year, the plant huddles unadorned and unnoticed on the parched earth. A. californica is sufficiently rare that it has been classified as an endangered species. In October 1990, more than 3 months after McCandless left Atlanta, a National Park Service ranger named Bud Walsh was sent into the backcountry of Lake Mead National Recreation Area to tally bear paw poppies so that the federal government might better know just how scarce the plants were. A. californica grows only in gypsum soil, of a sort that occurs in abundance along the south shore of Lake Mead. So that is where Walsh led his team of rangers to conduct the botanical survey. They turned off Temple Bar Road, drove 2 roadless miles down the bed of Detrital Wash, parked their rigs near the lake shore, and started scrambling up the steep east bank of the Wash, a slope of crumbly white gypsum. A few minutes later, as they neared the top of the bank, one of the rangers happened to glance back down into the Wash while pausing to catch his breath. "Hey, look down there," he yelled. "What the hell is that?" At the edge of the dry riverbed, in a thicket of saltbush not far from where they had parked, a large object was concealed beneath a dun-colored tarp. When the rangers pulled off the tarp, they found an old yellow Datsun without license plates. A note taped to the windshield read, "This piece of shit has been abandoned. Whoever can get it out of here can have it." The doors had been left unlocked. The floorboards were plastered with mud, apparently from a recent flash flood. When he looked inside, Walsh found a Gianni guitar, a saucepan containing $4.93 in loose change, a football, a garbage bag full of old clothes, a fishing rod and tackle, 25 pounds of rice, and in the glove compartment, the keys to the vehicle's ignition. The rangers searched the surrounding area for anything suspicious, according to Walsh, and then departed. 5 days later, another ranger returned to the abandoned vehicle, managed to jumpstart it without difficulty, and drove it to the National Park Service maintenance yard at Temple Bar. "He drove it back at 60 miles an hour, Walsh recalled. "Said the thing ran like a champ." Attempting to learn who owned the car, the Rangers sent out a bulletin over the teletype to relevant law enforcement agencies and ran a detailed search of computer records across the Southwest to see if the Datsun's VIN, vehicle identification number, was associated with any crimes. Nothing turned up. By and by, the Rangers traced the car's serial number to the Hertz Corporation, the vehicle's original owner. Hertz said they had sold it as a used rental car many years earlier and had no interest in reclaiming it. Whoa, great, Walsh remembers thinking. A freebie from the road gods. A car like this will make a great undercover vehicle for drug interdiction. And indeed it did. Over the next 3 years, the Park Service used that Datsun to make undercover drug buys that led to numerous arrests in the crime-plagued National Recreation Area, including the bust of a high-volume methamphetamine dealer operating out of a trailer near Bullhead City. We're still getting a lot of mileage out of that old car even now, Walsh proudly reports 2.5 years after finding the Datsun. Put a few bucks of gas in the thing and it'll go all day. Real reliable. I kind of wondered why nobody ever showed up to reclaim it. The Datsun, of course, as we all know, belonged to Chris McCandless. After piloting it out west of Atlanta, he arrived in Lake Mead National Recreational Area on July 6th, riding a giddy Emersonian high. Ignoring posted warnings that off-road driving is strictly forbidden, McCandless steered the Datsun off the pavement where it crossed a broad, sandy wash. He drove 2 miles down the riverbed to the south shore of the lake. The temperature was 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The empty desert stretched into the distance, shimmering in the heat. Surrounded by hollas, burr sage, and the comical scurrying of collared lizards, McCandless pitched his tent in the puny shade of a tamarisk and basked in his newfound freedom. Detrital Wash extends for some 50 miles from Lake Mead into the mountains north of Kingman. It drains a big chunk of the country. Most of the year, the wash is dry as chalk. During the summer months, however, superheated air rises from the scorched earth like bubbles from the bottom of a boiling kettle, rushing heavenward in turbulent convection currents. Frequently, the updrafts create cells of muscular, anvil-headed cumulonimbus clouds that can rise 30,000 feet or more above the Mojave. 2 days after McCandless had set up camp beside Lake Mead, an unusually robust wall of thunderheads reared up in the afternoon sky, and it began to rain, very hard, over much of the Detrital Valley. McCandless was camped at the edge of the wash, a couple of feet higher than the main channel, so when the bore of brown water came rushing down from the high country, he had just enough time to gather his tent and belongings and save them from being swept away. There was nowhere to move the car, however, as the only route of egress was now a foaming, full-blown river. As it turned out, the flash flood didn't have enough power to carry away the vehicle or even do any lasting damage. But it did get the engine wet. So wet that when McCandless tried to start the car soon after, the engine wouldn't catch, and in his impatience, he drained the battery. With the battery dead, there was no way to get the Datsun running. If he hoped to get the car back to a paved road, McCandless had no chance but to walk out and notify the authorities of his predicament. If he went to the Rangers, however, they would have some irksome questions for him. Why had he ignored posted regulations and driven down the wash in the first place? Was he aware that the vehicle's registration had expired 2 years before and had not been renewed? Did he know his driver's license had also expired, and the vehicle was uninsured as well? Truthful responses to these queries were not likely to be well received by the Rangers. McCandless could endeavor to explain that he had answered to statutes of a higher order, that as a latter-day adherent of Henry David Thoreau, he took as gospel the essay of On the Duty of Civil Disobedience, that's a writing of Thoreau's, and thus considered it his moral responsibility to flout the laws of the state. It was eminently probable, however, that deputies of the federal government would share his point of view. There would be thickets of red tape to negotiate and fines to pay. It was improbable, however, that the deputies would share his point of view. He would have to go through a ton of red tape and to negotiate and fines to pay. His parents would no doubt be contacted. There was no way to avoid such aggravation. He could simply abandon the Datsun and resume his odyssey on foot, and that's what he decided to do. Instead of feeling distraught over this turn of events, moreover, McCandless was exhilarated. He saw the flash flood as an opportunity to shed unnecessary baggage. He concealed the car as best he could beneath a brown tarp, stripped it of its Virginia plates, and hid them. He buried his Winchester deer hunting rifle with a few other possessions that he might one day want to recover. Then, in a gesture that would have done Thoreau and Tolstoy proud, he arranged all his paper currency in a pile in the sand, a pathetic little stack of 1s and 5s and 20s, and put a match to it. $123 in legal tender was promptly reduced to ash and smoke. We know all this because McCandless documented the burning of his money and most of the events that followed in a journal snapshot album he would later leave with Wayne Westerberg for safekeeping before departing for Alaska. Although the tone of the journal, written in the third person in a stilted, self-consciousness voice, often veers towards melodrama, the available evidence indicates that McCandless did not misrepresent the facts. Telling the truth was a credo he took seriously. So we're getting facts from what he documented, because everything about his values seems to say he would speak the truth, write the truth. After loading his few remaining possessions into a backpack, McCandless set out on July 10th to hike around Lake Mead. This, his journal acknowledges, turned out to be a tremendous mistake. In extreme July temperatures becomes delirious. Suffering from heat stroke, he managed to flag down some passing boaters who gave him a lift to Colville Bay, a marina near the west end of the lake, where he stuck out his thumb and took to the road. McCandless tramped around the West for the next 2 months. I mean, just a pause. We already see that McCandless, like any, I would think, younger person who is new to taking on these adventures, makes mistakes. So I don't think we can fault a person like this for making mistakes and that this was a sign he never should have done it. But we already see that mistakes dog him from the very onset of his journey, and through luck and the help of other people, at least, so long as he stays around and connected to civilization, has allowed him to recover and weather the storms, if you will, of some of these mistakes so far. McCandless tramped around the West for the next 2 months, spellbound by the scale and power of the landscape, thrilled by minor brushes with the law, savoring the intermittent company of other vagabonds he met along the way. Allowing his life to be shaped by circumstance, he hitched to Lake Tahoe, hiked into the Sierra Nevada, and spent a week walking north on the Pacific Crest Trail before exiting the mountains and returning to the pavement. Quite an accomplishment, and probably an awesome journey and vacation, if it maybe had stopped there, right? At the end of July, he accepted a ride from a man who called himself Crazy Ernie and offered McCandless a job on a ranch in Northern California. Photographs of the place show an unpainted, tumble-down house surrounded by goats and chickens, bed springs, broken televisions, shopping carts, old appliances, and mounds of garbage. After working there 11 days with 6 other vagabonds, it became clear to McCandless that Ernie had no intention of ever paying him, so he stole a red 10-speed bicycle from the clutter in the yard, pedaled into Chico, and ditched the bike in a mall parking lot. Then he resumed a life of constant motion, riding his thumb north and west through Red Bluff, Weaverville, and Willow Creek. At Arcata, California, in the dripping redwood forest of the Pacific Shore. Oh, I'd love to go there one day. How about you? Have any of you folks been there in the redwood forest or anything? McCandless turned right on U.S. Highway 101 and headed up the coast. 60 miles south of the Oregon line, near the town of Orick, a pair of drifters and an old van pulled over to consult their maps when they noticed a boy crouching in the bushes off the side of the road. He was wearing long shorts and this really stupid hat, says Jan Burris, a 41-year-old rubber tramp who was traveling around the West selling knickknacks at flea markets and swap meets with her boyfriend, Bob. He had a book about plants with him, and he used it to pick berries, collecting them in a gallon milk jug with the top cut off. He looked pretty pitiful, so I yelled, "Hey, you want to ride somewhere?" I thought maybe we could give him a meal or something. We got to talking. He was a nice kid. Said his name was Alex. And he was big-time hungry. Hungry. But real happy. Said he'd been surviving on edible plants he identified from the book. Like he was real proud of it. Said he was tramping around the country, having a big old adventure. He told us about abandoning his car and burning all his money. I said, why would you want to do that? Claimed he didn't need money. I have a son about the same age Alex was, and we've been estranged for years now, so I said to Bob, man, we got to take this kid with us. You need to school him about some things. Alex took a ride with us up from Oric Beach, where we were staying, and camped with us for a week. He was a really good kid. Thought the world of him. When he left, we never expected to hear from him again, but he made a point of staying in touch. For the next 2 years, Alex sent us a postcard every month or two. From Oric, McCandless continued north up the coast. Isn't that kind of cool how it sort of fades into the stories of the people he saw along the way and then back to the narration? He passed Pistol River, Coos Bay, Seal Rock, Manzanita, Astoria, Hocorim, Hump Tulips, Queets, Forks, Port Angeles, Port Townsend, Seattle. He was alone, as James Joyce wrote of Stephen Dedalus, his artist as a young man. He was unheeded, happy, and near to the wild heart of life. He was alone, and young, and willful, and wild-hearted, alone amid a waste of wild air and brackish waters, and the sea harvest of shells and tangle and veiled gray sunlight. On August 10th, shortly before meeting Jan Burris and Bob, McCandless had been ticketed for hitchhiking near Willow Creek in the gold mining country east of Eureka. In an uncharacteristic lapse, McCandless gave his parents' Annandale address when the arresting officer demanded to know his permanent place of residence. The unpaid ticket appeared in Walt and Billy's mailbox at the end of August. Walt and Billy, terribly concerned over Chris's vanishing act, had by that time already contacted the Annandale police, who had been of no help. When the ticket arrived from California, they became frantic. One of their neighbors was the director of the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, and Walt approached this man, an Army general, for advice. The general put him in touch with a private investigator named Peter Kalitka, who'd done contract work for both the DIA and the CIA. He was the best. I think DIA might be the Department of Internal Affairs, CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. I think we all know that. He was the best, the general assured Walt. If Chris was out there, Kalitka would find him. Using the Willow Creek ticket as a starting point, Kalitka launched an extremely thorough search, chasing down leads that led as far afield as Europe and South Africa. His efforts, however, turned up nothing. Until December, when he learned from an inspection of tax records that Chris had given away his college fund to Oxfam. That really scared us, says Walt. By that point, we had absolutely no idea what Chris could be up to. The hitchhiking ticket just didn't make any sense. He loved that Datsun so much, it was mind-boggling to me that he would ever abandon it and travel on foot. Although, in retrospect, I guess it shouldn't have surprised me. Chris was very much of the school that you should own nothing except what you can carry on your back, and at a dead run. As Kalitka was trying to pick up Chris's scent in California, McCandless was already far away, hitching east across the Cascade Range, across the sagebrush uplands and lava beds of the Columbia River Basin, across the Idaho Panhandle into Montana. There, outside Cutbank, he crossed paths with Wayne Westerberg, and by the end of September, he was working for him in Carthage. When Westerberg was jailed and the work came to a halt, with winter coming on, McCandless headed for warmer climes. On October 28th, he caught a ride with a long-haul trucker into Needles, California. Overjoyed upon reaching the Colorado River, McCandless wrote in his journal. Then he left the highway and started walking south through the desert, following the riverbank. 12 miles on foot took him to Topak, Arizona, a dusty way station along Interstate 40 where the freeway intersects the California border. While he was in town, he noticed a second-hand aluminum canoe for sale, and on impulse decided to buy it and paddle down the Colorado River to the Gulf of California, nearly 400 miles to the south, across the border with Mexico. This lower stretch of the river, from the Hoover Dam to the Gulf, has little in common with the unbridled torrent that explodes through the Grand Canyon, some 250 miles upstream from Topak. Emasculated by dams and diversion canals, the lower Colorado burbles indolently from reservoir to reservoir through some of the hottest, starkest country on the continent. McCandless was stirred by the austerity of this landscape, by its saline beauty. The desert sharpened the sweet ache of his longing, amplified it, gave shape to it in sear geology and clean slant of light. From Topak, McCandless paddled south, down Lake Havasu, under the bleached dome of sky, huge and empty. He made a brief excursion up the Bill Williams River, a tributary of the Colorado, then continued downstream through the Colorado River Indian Reservation, the Cibola National Wildlife Refuge, the Imperial National Wildlife Refuge. He drifted past saguaros and alkali flats, camped beneath escarpments of naked Precambrian stone. In the distance, spiky, chocolate-brown mountains floated on eerie pools of mirage. Leaving the river for a day to track a herd of wild horses, he came upon a sign warning that he was trespassing the U.S. Army's highly restricted Yuma Proving Ground. McCandless was not deterred in the least. So that's like where the Army sets off rounds and explosives and tests like weapons and stuff. So wow, gutsy. At the end of November, he paddled through Yuma, where he stopped long enough to replenish his provisions and sent a postcard to Westerberg in care of Glory House, the Sioux Fall work release facility where Westerberg was doing time. "Hey, Wayne," the card reads. "How's it going? I hope your situation has improved since the last time we spoke. I've been tramping around Arizona for about a month now. This is a good state. There are all kinds of fantastic scenery, and the climate is wonderful. But apart from sending greetings, the main purpose of this card is to thank you once again for all your hospitality. It's rare to find a man as generous and good-natured as you are. Sometimes I wish I hadn't met you, though. Tramping is too easy with all this money. My days were more exciting when I was penniless and had to forage around for my next meal. I couldn't make it now without money, however, and there's very little fruiting agriculture down here at this time. Please thank Kevin again for all the clothes he gave me. I would have froze to death without them. I hope he got that book to you. Wayne, you really should read War and Peace. I meant it when I said you had one of the highest characters of any man I'd met. This is a very powerful and highly symbolic book. It has things in it that I think you will understand, things that escape most people. As for me, I've decided that I'm going to live this life for some time to come. The freedom and the simple beauty of it is just too good to pass up. One day I'll get back to you, Wayne, and repay some of your kindness. A case of Jack Daniels, maybe? Till then, I'll always think of you as a friend. God bless you, Alexander." I have a dog ear here. On December 2nd, he reached Morelos Dam and the Mexican border. Worried that he would be denied entry because he was carrying no identification, he sneaked into Mexico by paddling through the dam's open floodgates and shooting the spillway below. Wow, it's intense. Alex looks quickly around for signs of trouble, his journal records, but his entry of Mexico is either unnoticed or ignored. Alexander is jubilant. Remember, he writes about himself in the third person, and he's calling himself Alexander Supertramp as his sort of road name. His jubilance, however, was short-lived. Below the Morelos Dam, the river turns into a maze of irrigation canals, marshland, and dead-end channels, along which McCandless repeatedly lost his way. Canals break off in a multitude of directions. Alex is dumbfounded, encounters some canal officials who can speak a little English. They tell him he has not been traveling south but west and is headed for the center of the Baja Peninsula. Alex is crushed, pleads and persists that there must be some waterway to the Gulf of California. They stare at Alex and think him crazy, but then a passionate conversation breaks out amongst them, accompanied by maps and a flourish of pencils. After 10 minutes, they present to Alex a route which will apparently take him to the ocean. He is overjoyed and hope bursts back into his heart. This is his journal entry now. Following the map, he reverses back up the canal until he comes upon the Canal de la Independencia, which he takes east. According to the map, this canal would bisect the Huelco Canal, which will turn south and flow all the way to the ocean. But his hopes are quickly smashed when the canal comes to a dead end in the middle of the desert. A reconnaissance mission reveals, however, that Alex has merely run back into the bed of the now dead and dry Colorado River. He discovers another canal about a half-mile on the other side of the riverbed. He decides to portage to this canal. It took McCandless most of 3 days to carry the canoe and his gear to the new canal. The journal entry for December 5th records, "At last, Alex finds what he believes to be the Huelteco Canal and heads south. Worries and fears return as the canal grows ever smaller. Local inhabitants help him portage around a barrier. Alex finds Mexicans to be warm, friendly people, much more hospitable than Americans, ... I mean, again, it's just, think about the common theme is people want to help other people, especially someone like Chris McCandless, who's putting himself out there on this adventure. December 6th, small but dangerous waterfalls litter the canal. December 9th, all hopes collapse. The canal does not reach the ocean, but merely peters out into a vast swamp. Alex is utterly confounded, decides he must be close to the ocean, and elects to try and work his way through swamp to sea. Alex becomes progressively lost to the point where he must push canoe through reeds and drag it through mud. All is in despair. Finds some dry ground to camp in swamp at sundown. Next day, on 12/10, Alex resumes quest for an opening to the sea, but only becomes more confused, traveling in circles. Completely demoralized and frustrated, this is again his journal, he lays in his canoe at day's end and weeps. But then, by fantastic chance, he comes upon Mexican duck hunting guides who can speak English. He tells them his story and his quest for the sea. They say there is no outlet to the sea. But then one among them agrees to tow Alex back to his base camp behind a small motor skiff and drive him and the canoe in the bed of the pickup truck to the ocean. It is a miracle. Wow. I mean, that journal doesn't even begin to tell us probably the depth of struggle he had to go through there. And the bravery to attempt something like that. Oh my gosh. The duck hunters dropped him in El Golfo de Santa Clara, a fishing village on the Gulf of California. From there, McCandless took to the sea, traveling down the eastern edge of the Gulf. Having reached his destination, McCandless slowed his pace, and his mood became more contemplative. He took photographs of a tarantula, plaintive sunsets, windswept dunes, the long curve of an empty coastline. The journal entries become short and perfunctory. He wrote fewer than 100 words over the month that followed. On December 14th, weary of paddling, he hauled the canoe far up the beach, climbed a sandstone bluff, and set up camp on the edge of a desolate plateau. He stayed there for 10 days until high winds forced him to seek refuge in a cage midway up the precipitous face of the bluff, where he remained for another 10 days. He greeted the new year by observing the full moon as it rose over the Gran Desierto, the great desert. 1,700 square miles of shifting dunes, the largest expanse of pure sand desert in North America. A day later, he resumed paddling down the barren shore. His journal entry for January 11, 1991 begins, "A very fateful day. After traveling some distance south, he beached the canoe on a sandbar far from shore to observe the powerful tides. An hour later, violent gusts started blowing down from the desert, and the wind and tidal rips conspired to carry him out to sea. The water by this time was a chaos of whitecaps that threatened to swamp and capsize his tiny craft. The wind increased to gale force. The whitecaps grew into high, breaking waves. In great frustration, the journal reads, he screams and beats canoe with oar. The oar breaks. Alex has one spare oar. He calms himself. If loses second oar, is dead. Finally, through extreme effort and much cursing, he manages to beach canoe on jetty and collapses exhausted on sand at sundown. This incident led Alexander to decide to abandon canoe and return north. On January 16th, so you don't hear like terror there. And what his main emotion he's recording is frustration that his journey is being held up by these unexpected circumstances. All through this, there seems to be the certainty to want to continue on and no fear of encountering unknown situations and stuff, only frustration. On January 16th, McCandless left the stubby metal boat on a hummock of dune grass southeast of El Golfo de Santa Clara and started walking north up the deserted beach. He had not seen or talked to another soul in 36 days. For that entire period, he subsisted on nothing but 5 pounds of rice and what marine life he could pull from the sea, an experience that would later convince him he could survive on similarly meager rations in the Alaska bush. He was back at the United States border on January 18th, caught by immigration authorities trying to slip into the country without ID. He spent a night in custody before concocting a story that sprang him from the slammer, minus his .38 caliber handgun, a beautiful Colt Python to which he was much attached, quote unquote. McCandless spent the next 6 weeks on the move across the Southwest, traveling as far east. I guess they're not going to explain to us what his story was, but whatever. As far east as Houston and as far west as the Pacific coast. To avoid being rolled by the unsavory characters who ruled the streets and freeway overpasses where he slept, he learned to bury what money he had before entering a city, then recover it on the way out of town. On February 3rd, according to his journal, McCandless went to Los Angeles to get an ID and a job, but feels extremely uncomfortable in society now and must return to the road immediately. 6 days later, camped at the bottom of the Grand Canyon with Thomas and Karen, a young German couple who had given him a ride, he wrote, "Can this be the same Alex that set out in July 1990? Malnutrition and the road have taken their toll on his body, over 25 pounds lost, but his spirit is soaring." So he's kind of fasting, almost on purpose, losing weight, learning to just do without and finding it sort of transcendent. On February 24th, 7.5 months after he abandoned the Datsun, McCandless returned to Detrital Wash. The Park Service had long since impounded the vehicle, but he unearthed his old Virginia plates, SJF 421, and a few belongings he'd buried there. Then he hitched into Las Vegas and found a job at an Italian restaurant. Again, back to his journal. Alexander buried his backpack in the desert on February 27th, and entered Las Vegas with no money and no ID, the journal tells us. He lived on the streets with bums and winos for several weeks. Vegas would not be the end of the story, however. On May 10, Itchy Feet returned, and Alex left his job in Vegas, still his journal, retrieved his backpack, and hit the road again. Though he found that if you are stupid enough to bury a camera underground, you won't be taking many pictures with it afterwards. So another lesson learned there for him. Thus, the story has no picture book from May 10, 1991 to January 7, 1992. But this is not important. It is the experiences, the memories, the great triumphant joy of living to the fullest extent in which real meaning is found. God, it's great to be alive. Thank you. Thank you. And that takes us to the end of chapter 4. Once again, as I told you in the previous reading, there's this excitement, exhilaration. Wow, if someone can just put themselves out there and explore this great world, you could actually get by much easier than you think. And the obstacles you run into may not be that, terminal, so long as you are enthusiastic and stuff. But there's always this tension of you're just getting by the skin of your teeth here, kid. You could only have gotten that far because people helped you and things like that. You stayed in society, or society would appear at the right time to save you. So just food for thought here as we go into chapter 5. We'll see you on the next one. Thanks for reading with me. Into the Wild.